Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning. Okay.
Good morning.
Before we get going, good morning. Before we get going, I just wanted to commend some exceptional enterprise reporting that's been going on, and I particularly wanted to highlight the reporting of Evan Perez and Caitlin Polance and Jeremy Herb with their story, their exclusive reporting about the federal government for 3 years looking for a suspected foreign link to Trump's 2016 campaign and money flowing through Egypt, and that reporting was just superb. And I also wanted to highlight the continued terrific reporting from the K-File and Andrew Kaczynski and M. Steck on Amy Coney Barrett and her paperwork. That's continued to be excellent as well. There's just a lot of really good enterprise reporting going on, and so thank you to everybody for that. I do want to say that, clearly there is a surge in coronavirus in the United States, obviously in Europe as well. But with regard to the United States, there is clearly a surge going on. And, there's no definitive moment to call something a second wave. So, there's no book on the shelf to tell us when the second wave is here, but we are clearly entering that period. And I don't want to be afraid of noting it. As Ben and I have discussed, we saw the pandemic before the WHO wanted to call it a pandemic. There's clearly a second wave upon us, and I don't think we should be afraid of that. So even though we are now less than 3 weeks from Election Day, and clearly there is a huge political story at hand tonight in dueling town halls, I want to start with coronavirus because I think that's where the story is. Matthew?
And Jeff, to your point, as we're on the brink of 8 million cases, America's coronavirus curve is back up to where it was in parts of July and August. Of course, the difference this time is that dangerous, cold, indoor winter weather is coming. Yesterday, the U.S. came in at close to 60,000 cases, the highest number day in over 2 months. Nearly 1,000 deaths reported just yesterday. There's been a steep 25% rise in the average number of new cases daily in the last 2 weeks alone. U.S. hospitalizations are at their highest since August. And of course, scientists coming out in force left and right against all of this herd immunity talk around the White House team, as we seem to see that strategy sort of recklessly playing out at these crowded campaign events. One attendee telling Jim Acosta, the sooner we get it, the sooner we'll be done with it. But of course, just about every respectable major public health organization lashing out at this. The WHO on New Day, Fauci on ABC this morning, the scores of scientists in the Lancet, the head of the Infectious Diseases Society, calling this thinking inappropriate, irresponsible, and ill-informed. And Fauci saying this morning that it is, quote, total nonsense to think that you can somehow protect the vulnerable while letting the virus rip throughout the population. Fauci says on vaccines, expect April for a wide vaccine availability, as the CDC makes a very optimistic forecast online, saying that there'll be some vaccine by year's end, more in the coming weeks and months, and available at thousands of providers. And Fauci also has this warning with the holidays, Thanksgiving ahead, warning Americans they, quote, may have to bite the bullet and sacrifice that social gathering. As we look around the country at the key regions and trends, several dozen states going in the wrong direction. Rural states increasingly struggling with record numbers. North and South Dakota reported the highest case numbers ever yesterday, and they remain up there at the top in per capita cases. Tennessee officials say the death rate is double in rural areas. The governor in Tennessee quarantining, by the way. Record hospitalizations in Missouri, 16 states averaging at their all-time peak a number of cases, many of them rural, Midwestern, and Western states. In North Carolina, ahead of the Trump event, the state is matching its all-time high for cases, about 2,000 a day, with a positivity rate of 9%. Wisconsin is one of the hot zone places where courts are striking down COVID restrictions from states. A judge temporarily halting the order limiting bar and restaurant gatherings. This comes after a judge in Michigan had blocked Whitmer's power to issue executive orders for safety. We've got Adrian Broadus near Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Hospital capacity is a big concern again in parts of the country. An Oklahoma regional hospital official telling us that ICU capacity is fluctuating somewhere between a little bit and none. And in Colorado, the governor says unless the numbers go down, hospital capacity there will be in jeopardy. And we've got Lucy Kavanaugh in Denver. In New York, the mayor says we are threatened with a full-blown second wave. The positivity rate, over 6% in those red zone clusters, Bringingrass in New York. And then in Georgia, Governor Kemp will decide today whether to let that state safety mandate expire at midnight, the one that limits gatherings and puts rules on businesses and medical facilities. We've got Nick Valencia in Atlanta. To this ongoing discussion about rallies as potential super spreader events, obviously we see image after image, night after night of clearly unsafe practices. But what does the data show? The health team taking a look at the upshot of the last few months worth of rallies and the weeks after. We know now that the Minnesota rally was tied to 16 cases, but those direct ties are hard to come by. Fauci saying this morning that it's clear when you have these congregate settings and so many people, you cannot run away from or argue with the numbers. Stuff like this is a high-risk endeavor, and Sanjay has a piece on this for AC 360. Also from the health team, Elizabeth Cohen's reporting that AstraZeneca's trial is still on hold after a month because the company has taken that long to get critical safety data to the FDA, which is now reviewing, and then just re-upping from yesterday in terms of vaccine trust and racial discrepancies amid COVID. This Kaiser survey finding that half of Black adults will not or definitely will not take a vaccine despite many being in these harder hit demographics. We've got Sanjay and Elizabeth available from the health team. Plenty going on with schools as they roll on. Days after resuming in person, Broward County has almost 50 staff and 1 student positive at several dozen different school sites. Boston's teachers union tried and failed to get an injunction to stop all in-person learning because the city's positivity rate is higher than what they had agreed on, and several more weeks of delay in starting in person in Denver because of the spike there. We've got Biana and Evan on education. And then, of course, the really notable sports impact, particularly in college football, the best-known coach, Nick Saban, with coronavirus. He says he was surprised at the diagnosis. He tried to be safe. He supported masks. He's asymptomatic. The AD at Alabama also testing positive ahead of the Alabama-Georgia game Saturday, and Ole Miss saying it has had COVID issues since playing Alabama last week, and the NFL canceling the 2021 Pro Bowl. The wrap piece on coronavirus today is Nick Watt for 4, 6, 8, and 10. And I'll pause there.
Okay, so look, I think that you've really outlined a lot of storylines there. The bottom line is that this new fall wave in America is clearly here in full force. Whether the first wave ever subsided or not, this one is gripping the country. And I do think that Fauci's comments this morning on Good Morning America blasting that Trump Atlas strategy to let things rip is ridiculous is really important. I also think his comments about Thanksgiving clearly resonate with the audience, and the WHO saying that healthy adults may have to wait until 2022 for a vaccine is a really big headline. And while we're on it, I do, this is not nowhere near important as everything else, but I do think college football's reckoning, as you outlined, is important. And, the outbreaks continue to grow among many programs. Turns out the Big Ten was right, and it's unclear why the Alabama game hasn't been postponed yet. But anyway, so there's a ton, as you've outlined there. Because I want to stay on COVID, and I think it's gripping the world. I want to move to international on COVID and the global resurgence that we're seeing. So international COVID.
Hey, good morning, everyone. So yeah, according to the WHO, roughly 80% of countries across Europe are seeing a growth in COVID cases. It looks now like Europe is surpassing the U.S. in record daily cases. So the second wave is definitely there too. It's backing leaders into a corner. Restrictions now announced in two big capitals, London and Paris. So just starting in the UK, our reporting there is really about how it's more of a disunited kingdom. London moving to tier 2 lockdown, another major city, Manchester, moving to tier 3 like Liverpool. So we're seeing this regional approach in England. Meanwhile, Scotland and Northern Ireland are in lockdowns, and Wales is now trying to block travelers from the rest of the UK. So a real patchwork approach there as the UK struggles to get control. Salma's in Manchester and Solwak is in London on all of those lines. Macron announcing a strict evening curfew, closing bars and restaurants at 9 p. In key French cities. So we've got Melissa Bell on that. Germany reported its highest number of infections since the beginning of the pandemic today. So Scott is in Berlin. Fred Pleitgen is in Moscow reporting on the Russian approval for a second vaccine without late-stage trials. They continue to set new records in daily death toll numbers. Italy recording the highest daily increases in cases since March. We've got Ben Wiedemann in Rome this morning. And just before I leave Europe, we saw the Queen in her first public outing since the COVID lockdown. So that's just interesting, and we have Anna Stewart on that story. So counter to what we're seeing in Europe, Asia, some areas of Asia, I should say, are faring better. Today we heard that Hong Kong and Singapore agreed to establish a bilateral air travel bubble. It would involve quarantine-free travel if passengers prove negative testing. So it's a step in the right direction there, and Selena Wang can handle that, and also on what parts of the Asian approach were stronger, meaning some areas are faring a little bit better than what we're seeing in the U.S. and Europe. So I'll stop there.
Okay. Thank you. So again, I do think that the global resurgence and what's going on across Europe, especially in UK and Paris and Italy, is just a really big story. And I want to encourage moving back to some international whips to cover that. Let's move to COVID business, please.
Jeff, good morning. And with that resurgence that you mentioned, there is still more pressure on the labor market. The Dow is down over 350 points and falling fast. Moments ago, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that 898,000 Americans applied for initial jobless claims last week. This was more than expected, far more than what was expected. New unemployment claims jumped in states, perhaps the reflection of those layoffs by Disney and the airlines. Right now, 25 million Americans currently receiving unemployment aid. It's been 11 weeks since Congress let that extra $600 aid expire, and 30 weeks of jobless claims, worse than anything we've seen before. And, in a stark research paper this morning from Columbia University, they point to that the poverty rate in the U.S. has grown by 8 million since May. So we have Christine Romans and Julia Chatterley available on all of that. And of course, corporate America continuing to sound the alarm this morning with no clear path for stimulus. Best Western CEO telling Matt Egan that he is frustrated with Congress for failing to provide additional federal aid, saying they're numb to it because the stock market is doing well and unemployment is below 9%. Walmart CEO Doug McMillon also telling CNBC this morning, that Americans need help right now and they don't care about politics. So we're tracking all of those developments. And of course, on CNBC moments ago, Treasury Secretary Mnuchin blaming politics for getting in the way. He's saying a deal is it's going to be hard to get done before the election, but he's going to keep trying. Perhaps the silver lining, he said that he will tell Pelosi today that he will agree to her language on testing. This was one of the obstacles in the talks that Bill Mattingly had been tracking. So of course, the Hill team and all of biz tracking that story today. Jeff, I just want to also mention the other big story, the bombshell New York Times report showing that Trump's White House economic advisors privately warning conservative insiders and wealthy donors about the uncertainty of COVID in late February, even as the president was trying to reassure the public and saying that everything was fine and the virus would soon disappear. Betsy Klein reporting moments ago, Mnuchin downplaying this report during his CNBC appearance, saying that it grossly exaggerates things and puts them in the wrong perspective. Christina Alessi has been working with the White House on that, and that is where we begin on COVID.
Right. So obviously, as we make the transition to Washington, that's an important story. In fairness, Mnuchin did deny it, which of course he would, but it is yet another example, according to the New York Times, of the Trump administration telling the public the opposite of the dire warnings that they were being given in private, or that they were giving in private. So I do think that's an important story, and I think that's a good way for us to transition to Washington for COVID in Washington before we get to politics.
Okay, so COVID in Washington, as the president in his rally last night continues these super spreader events, continues his misleading rhetoric about the virus. We're starting to get some details of his health. He had 102 fever, but there's no sense out there that actually getting COVID made him more understanding of it, and in fact is creating sort of this sense that he had medical care that many others did not. He flouted his doctors, the doctors he had access to, and then, of course, this note that Barron tested positive, using that as I don't even think he knew he had it, supporting the line that kids, the incorrect line that kids are immune from it. And then just to note this Melania letter, which just was noteworthy in a lot of ways. She talked about the natural drugs she used. She said she had this unfamiliar feeling being the patient when she's used to encouraging the nation to stay healthy and safe, this as she did not wear a mask at the debate, and unclear exactly what that message is. And then she spent time talking about reflecting while Trump was at the hospital. Noting also Kevin Liptak's reporting that the whole Trump task force is completely invisible, and they are nowhere to be found in the midst of this second wave. So I think that's the COVID part of Washington.
Yeah, I think that's a really good story. Okay. Obviously, it'll be hard to separate politics from this, but let's open it up for any thoughts on COVID before we move to politics and election. COVID?
Hey, Jeff, good morning. It's Ben. Just to add on to what you said about the second wave, for anyone who hasn't seen it, I would encourage you to take a look at a really frightening line chart that Sanjay has been using, but that is available for everybody. It shows the second wave in the 1918 pandemic was much worse. Not a little bit worse, but much worse. This is where most of the deaths happened, was during the second wave during the winter season. As we talked about last week, flu season is here. We have passed the time to get this down to baseline. This is sort of the, here we go moment, as Jeff was getting at. Even if it does not come to bear to be as bad as we're expecting, I would say, not leaning to lean into the fact that, maybe people listened to us and did the things that they were supposed to do rather than saying, we got it wrong. One other thing I just wanted to highlight quickly was that, New Day did a really great interview with the WHO's Maria Van Kerkhove this morning, where she talked about COVID fatigue. And this is a very, very real thing. We have all the tools that we need to stop the spread right now, which we've been talking about ad nauseum for the last, months and months and months. Social distancing, masks, washing hands. It really is that simple, but people are tired of doing it. But without doing that, we're going to see a lot of deaths this fall and winter. And I think we can, really lead the way here on this messaging and seriously save some lives. And then lastly, we had a story for digital in the works on Thanksgiving that we were going to hold a little bit, but with all the talk about Thanksgiving by Fauci and others, we will look to get that out today.
Thank you, Ben. Other thoughts?
Hey, Jeff, it's David. I just have a question for Ben about the 1918 second wave. Is it because the virus mutated, or is it because that the seasons changed and the conditions were more conducive to spread? little bit of both?
I believe it's probably a little bit of both, but I believe more the latter. And I would say the virus itself is different enough that I wouldn't put too much stock in the mutating then versus mutating now. I actually have not personally looked into the mutations back in 1918 closely enough to say for sure. I would say this is more about the season, the conditions, and people's behavior changing, and that's going to be the driver of most of it.
Any other thoughts on COVID?
Just to counter for a second, I mean, it was 1918. We didn't even have radio then. We have much better ways to communicate to people about their behavior. And obviously, we've seen from the president on down and these people at the rallies who ignore the instructions. But then isn't there a more optimistic likelihood to have behavior be way different than it was in 2018 when communication to people wasn't nearly what it is at all in 2020?
I would like to say yes, and certainly we do have more communication and rapid instant communication, but I also think it's very clear not only are some people not listening, but some people are listening to absolutely the opposite messages than they should be listening to, and I think that could provide enough noise to be a counterweight to the good information that's putting out, which is why I think it's even more important that we really lean into the things that people should be doing and hope that we can, prevent some of those sicknesses and deaths, because other people are hearing the message, the let it rip message, and, it's not real and that sort of thing. So while we have more communication, there's also a lot more noise that goes along with the good message that people should be hearing as well.
Anyone else on COVID? Okay, then look, the other obviously major story of the day is we're 19 days from Election Day, and we have dueling town halls tonight with a number of political and media angles. And for that, I'd like to turn it to David.
Good morning, Jeff. Yes, as you mentioned, there was supposed to be a presidential debate tonight, a town hall style debate. Obviously, coronavirus, specifically the president's coronavirus, got in the way of that. And so we end up with these dueling town halls that are happening simultaneously. So good luck, America, with trying to assess both of these candidates. Donald Trump will be down in Florida on NBC at 8 o'clock, and Joe Biden will be in Philadelphia in that National Constitution Center setting with ABC at 8 o'clock. We'll have Arlette Saenz in Philly, Jim Acosta down in Florida around these dueling town halls, and obviously they're happening in two critical battleground states. And, the onus, as it is for anybody who is sort of running from behind for Donald Trump in this scenario, 19 days from Election Day with nearly 15 million votes cast and already, and people voting at quite a clip, is to use an opportunity like this to actually change his position in the race and narrow that gap. So that's sort of the burden on him tonight. So obviously, so much of the campaign day will be driving to those two big town hall events. You also have in-person early voting beginning today in North Carolina, one of those big 6 states that will probably determine the ultimate outcome of this race. It has been a near dead even close race in North Carolina for much of the duration of this campaign, and it's why you're going to see a bunch of campaign activity there today. Donald Trump will be there before he goes to Florida for that town hall. Kamala Harris will be doing a whole slew of events in North Carolina. So clearly that state is very much on your battleground map today. You saw the news last night that Joe Biden yet again posted a record-breaking monthly fundraising haul, $383 million, the campaign reports in September, and that they entered October in the final 5-week stretch of the campaign with more than $400 million cash on hand in their bank account. It is, I know we've talked about this. We see the grassroots enthusiasm. We see the Act Blue, I think, raised $1.5 billion for Democratic candidates across the board in the last quarter. It's just an astounding amount of money, and given where Biden was and where he is now, it is yet another metric of that Democratic enthusiasm, much like we talk about in these early voting numbers, where, people are just coming out in droves compared to the early vote at this point 4 years ago. Obviously, the pandemic is part of that and the push for people to vote early, but it is also clearly Democrats who are outnumbering Republicans in these ballots cast where that kind of information is available is a clear sign of enthusiasm there too. Having said that, if you haven't read the Tom Edsall piece in the New York Times today, I would urge everyone to do so. It details some stuff about how this is not yet a closed deal for Joe Biden. Specifically, it highlights exactly what Bill Stepien, the Trump campaign manager, was highlighting on a conference call with reporters earlier this week, using voter registration, which the Trump campaign points to constantly, says that the polls don't capture the real meaning and import of these voter registration numbers. I guess we'll see who's right about that when we see the election adjourned. But that in the 6 states where Donald Trump won by 5 points or fewer last time around, in 4 of them where they break out voter registration by party, Republicans are outpacing Democrats in all of them except Arizona. And this is the Trump campaign believes wholeheartedly that these registration numbers are important because they believe a newly registered voter is a very easy voter, the easiest kind of voter to get and cast their first ballot and actually turn out and vote in this election is their argument. But it's worth taking a look at that Edsall piece. We've got a whole sort of suite of great battleground state stories today, really putting voters' voices at the center of them. There's so much talk about polls and what have you, but this is a good opportunity to hear from voters. Jeff Zeleny later today will have a piece on Florida seniors. Remember that Donald Trump won seniors in Florida by some 17 percentage points in 2016. Zeleny caught up with some seniors, folks in their 80s who have voted reliably Republican, including for Trump in 2016, who cannot vote for him again, they say. And it's sort of, I think, emblematic of what you are seeing. And of course, coronavirus playing a big part of that. So Zeleny looking at Florida seniors tonight as the president is in Florida doing that town hall. If you didn't see Dana Bash's piece from Battleground, Pennsylvania, the path that the Trump campaign is pursuing, finding more of those white non-college educated voters who didn't show up in 16 or 18 and turning them out, the path that they have, sort of the only path they see truly available to them in terms of trying to recreate 270 electoral votes is exactly this kind of strategy of finding these Trump-minded voters who didn't actually turn out as voters their previous time around and getting them out to vote. And Dan Merkel for Digital has a great story up from Wisconsin, southwest side of that state, and Obama-Trump areas. And what he found over and over again is this level of exhaustion among voters, just the Trump era exhaustion, the polarization exhaustion, obviously the virus and all that adds to it. It's a good look at what's going on there in Southwest Wisconsin. So a good mix of battleground state storytelling for folks. And then just to note that Obama did on that Pod Save America podcast, talking about Trump, talking about that he has no patience for foreign policy, which is why Obama sees Trump not really accomplishing anything in the foreign policy space, but also talked sort of challengingly to Republicans about should Biden win, sort of the post-Trump era Republican Party, and if how these Republicans who remained silent through so much of the norm busting and undermining of small d democracy that has been going on by Donald Trump for the better part of 3.5 years, how, if indeed he's not there anymore, the Republican Party adjusts or doesn't adjust to that is something that Obama sort of spoke about at some length with those guys. So there's some good sound there, and I think those are our highlights.
Okay, I'll just pick up where you ended, just on the Obama stuff. I think the Obama sound is really good. I think we should be using it. You know, obviously this is Obama's emergence now at the end of the campaign. His comments about Trump trying to decimate the entire U.S. foreign policy, and that the is really important. I do think that, as you point out, you know, voting starts in North Carolina. We've just got massive early voter turnout that we've been covering. And the question is, what does that tell us? What is going on? I want to point out, as you said, Jeff Zeleny is concentrating on the seniors. John King's going to do some work at the map with 19 days to go. John's take is that this election will come down to women, and women will determine not only whether Trump wins or loses, but whether Democrats get the Senate and maybe 15 more House seats. I think that's important framing that John has, that it's really going to be women that will determine this. I do think, as you point out, Biden's got $400 million, more than $400 million cash on hand now. How does somebody spend that in the final, 20 days? I mean, what is he going to do with that money, I think, is a interesting question. And then obviously the other big driving story of the day, with 19 days to go, are these dueling town halls. And I want to make sure we're covering, by the way, we shouldn't shy away from these. Even though they're on NBC and ABC, they are what they are. We don't need to be afraid of it. But we've got all the political angles, and the fact that they were supposed to be together tonight, and that Trump campaign didn't handle this well, yet they are being rewarded with this platform tonight. So I do think we get at all the political angles and all the media angles. The media angles that Brian and Oliver have been covering are an important part of this story too, and I don't want to underplay those as well. And the only other political story that I see, David, is that is the California GOP saying that it won't comply with the cease and desist order to take down the fake ballot drop boxes. I think that's an important story. Okay. Let me just turn to Washington, and then we'll open it up for politics. Washington, is there anything else on politics or anything?
Well, just to fill out some of this voting stuff, the Democrats have a significant advantage in these key states. Pennsylvania, the ratio is 5-1. North Carolina, it's 2.5 to 1. This obviously doesn't mean that, it was always expected Democrats were going to vote early sooner, but the overall numbers are just record numbers. As you said, North Carolina, Diane Gallagher is there. She also has this really good reporting about this ballot curing process and how voters may not even know that their ballot was rejected. This is disproportionately going to affect Black voters. And then in North Carolina, also, this judge upheld the November 12th deadline for ballots postmarked by Election Day, but they also came down against, it made it harder to cure absentee ballots with missing signatures. So there's just a lot going on that front. A couple other things I just want to run through. The Amy Coney Barrett hearings, no Barrett today, but Democrats will be up trying to delay the vote, which is really all they can do, but it's on it's on track for next week. You mentioned the K-file reporting, which has more of her calendars, which were not listed in her questionnaire. I do want to mention this United story about how they worked with the Department of Defense to do a really big study on flying and COVID, and it is quite encouraging news about how these particles don't reach other passengers in significant numbers. So that's good. And then, lastly, just this Axe file with Bolton that came out this morning, just some eye-popping things on that. No one can say no to Trump. He's worried about these next 3 weeks and the ugly departure and firing multiple cabinet officials should he lose.
Right.
And that's
right. That's an interview that Axe did for his podcast with Bolton earlier this week. Okay, let's open it up for thoughts on anything with regard to politics, election, Trump, Washington, anything therein.
Hey, Jeff, I just want to add one angle to the early voting thing, because I've heard a few people in line say this in sound bites in various places. I actually think that the Democratic numbers would also seem to support this idea. I think Trump's attack on mail-in voting and all of these lawsuits and all of these stories that say, will ballots get counted and will they be thrown out, et cetera, actually forced a lot of people into a decision to go to the polls and vote instead of mailing in their ballots. And I think one of the reasons we're seeing these huge lines, and again, there have been some sound bites, I think, on CNN, but also on other networks from people saying that they were concerned about their mail-in ballot not getting there. And so, there was a ton of sort of buzz on social media. And again, social media doesn't determine what the country feels. I understand that. But there's a lot of buzz on social media. Got to get your ballots early, got to mail them early, make sure they get there. Then there was sort of a second wave where it said, hey, there's a lot of concerns about mail-in ballots. If there's any way you can get to the polls, even Michelle Obama, I think, said, put on a mask and bring your lunch and go and vote. Remember, that was Michelle Obama's message, was protect yourself, but bring a lunch, bring some water, wait in line and vote. I think that's a big part of the story, and I think that's an interesting angle to just approach it from in terms of a reaction to the worries about mail-in ballots and whether or not they'll be counted.
For sure.
And I just want to add one footnote to what Michael said, and we'll be talking about a lot about this in the next few weeks. Voting in person early, the way Michael just described, will all be reported on election night, which helps decrease chaos afterwards and really fights against Trump's arguments of a rigged election and all the things that he's going to argue. So it helps in a couple of ways. Yes, it makes sure your ballot gets counted, but it also makes sure your ballot gets counted and reported on election day, which is good for Biden and good for reduction in chaos.
So to that point, do we have a graphic or any kind of visual digitally that shows when the states process absentee votes or mail-in votes?
Yes,
before election day,
yes,
Congress.
Yes. Harry Yenton has been doing that multiple times on air. We've had that graphic up multiple times. I do think, to Michael's point, though, there's been a lot of chatter about, has Trump's attacks on mail-in voting backfired on him, especially in places that do all, places that rely heavily on this. So I think it's a really good angle. Other thoughts? Matthew, domestic, rest of domestic, please.
All right, just a few other things. We'll keep an eye on this protest planned at 3:30 in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, over the fatal police shooting of 17-year-old Alvin Cole. This is a protest organized by Jay-Z Social Justice Group. This is the case of the officer who was cleared in his third fatal shooting, and Jay-Z's team is holding a rally today to call for that officer's firing, which is still before a board. This is after many days of protests and tensions building. Prosecutors say that the teenager pointed a gun. The officer reasonably thought he was in danger. There have been a lot of arrested protests, including members of Alvin Cole's family. Adrienne Broaddus's location on COVID is actually very close to this event. She can come up if this rises. There's a hearing at 1:30 for the officers accused in the George Floyd case. It's mostly about stealing previous body cam videos, procedural things, but we'll see what comes of it. In the Breonna Taylor case and the fallout there, still waiting for this key ruling on the anonymous grand juror and whether they can speak publicly. The attorney for the boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, on CBS this morning saying the whole case top to bottom has been rife with incompetence and corruption, says that Walker will prevail in civil court. He says they break into his house, they kill his girlfriend, they frame him for covering it up. The charges are dismissed, and if he's supposed to say thank you, there will be a consequence, he says. And finally, just tracking this federal investigation into the second incident of a jetpack flyer spotted over LAX airport traffic in recent weeks. We'll see if that turns up anyone only in LA and definitely in 2020. And I think that is it.
Okay, thank you. Anything else in international?
No, Jeff, that's it.
Okay, thank you. Anything else in business?
That's it from us, Jeff.
Anything? Thank you. Anything else in Washington?
Nope.
Okay, so as we before we move to digital, is there anything anybody wants to bring up? Okay, digital. Hey, Jeff, we had 33.5 million uniques yesterday. We had 4 stories over 2 million uniques. That's a lot. The number one was the Trump campaign donation, our investigations exclusive. Number 2 was the Michigan sheriff. Thank you, Sarah Seidner, on sheriffs and militias and their links. Number 3 was Melania on she and Barron. And number 4 was the COVID and blood type stories. Those are all over 2 million. Top right now, actually, is this Pete Buttigieg on Fox News, kind of how he keeps going viral with speaking truth to Fox and leaving their anchors stunned. It's extraordinary how popular the piece is. Number 2 right behind that is Collinson, but Buttigieg is over 10,000. Collinson is approaching 10,000. And his story is about Trump's lack of honesty on COVID and how it hangs over his reelection bid. Top videos overnight was this billboard on the way to the Trump rally saying this way to the super spreader event. Also Cuomo on Trump's family disclosures on the illnesses. And yesterday, number 1 overall video for us was Wolf and Pelosi. So that story kept giving. Top engagement, interesting enough, on digital was underscored, which talking about Amazon Prime Day. So that's a first for us. So right now, of course, we'll stay on all day on our exclusives, the K-File and the Amy Coney Barrett, which is number 3 right now, actually, the DLE on that. And then we have a follow kind of later today on the takeaways from the Caitlin, Evan, and Jeremy investigation. So great to have. Other stories coming today, obviously the voting is something we've been all over and we'll stay on, including the California GOP drop boxes. And also a great op-ed from Avalon on the history of voter intimidation that we will package with it. We also have an important piece on the census, and this miscount, which is happening, is likely to lead to $1.5 trillion in federal funds not going to Americans and to American cities. Tonight, of course, we'll have the DLE. You cannot watch a town hall on NBC and ABC at the same time, but you can on CNN through our DLE, and that's where we'll cover it. On the race front, we'll watch this Alvin Cole protest. We have a very smart think piece coming from Nicole Chavez, following on Amy Cooper, that's a Central Park woman against the black bird watcher yesterday. We have the history of white women lying about black men and sexual assault, and that ugly history in America since Jim Crow, going back to Emmett Till, the Scottsboro Boys, and talking about that. And then we have another smart think piece from Daniel Burke, actually looking into QAnon and how it is luring in unsuspecting Christians. Just 2 last things from digital distinctive journalism I want to highlight. We have a piece on Poland and the anti-LGBTQ reality. 1/3 of Poland is covered by quote-unquote LGBT-free zones. This is what it's like to be trapped inside one. Really amazing international journalism that only CNN can do. And then finally, on the audio front, we have really distinctive stuff. That Axe file with John Bolton has been mentioned already. We also have a Don Lemon, Silence is Not Enough podcast. It's back, and they're talking about voting and voter suppression. And we also have our coronavirus podcast. We're talking about the danger of us becoming numb to the numbers and to the scale of this disease. And that's it. Thank you. Thank you, Marcus. John?
All right, so coronavirus leading the shows. Elizabeth Cohen with a big focus on the fall wave, rising cases approaching 8 million, and Fauci's multiple warnings this morning, including gatherings on Thanksgiving. Also, lots of vaccine news, the adjusting timeline and Pfizer on young adults having better response in older adults in trials. Vaccine experts Peter Hotez and Paul Offit on that. We'll be hitting numerous reporters around the country, Adrian Broadus, on the COVID restrictions keep getting struck down in Wisconsin, despite that being one of the biggest hotspots. Lucy Kapanoff with the hospital capacity concerns in Denver. We're watching to see what Governor Kemp does here in Georgia. Will he let restrictions lapse, despite continuing to see 1,000 cases a day, and definitely staying all over the college football story. We have a couple of Wisconsin bookings. The president of one of the biggest hospital groups in Wisconsin on the surging patient load there. Brianna has an Oshkosh bar owner who is going to be joining us from his hospital bed. He's suffering greatly from coronavirus and has some very pointed things to say toward Trump. Malcolm Jenkins on the growing issues with college football. And then we have Mark Mazzetti with his reporting that was just discussed, the New York Times reporting about the administration private briefings fueling the sell-off back earlier in the year when they're giving a very different public message. The economic angles, the jobless claims and real concerns about the recovery stalling. Report out of Columbia University that the number of people who are now in the poverty category has grown by 8 million since May. That is an alarming number. Miguel's piece profiling the Arizona family is strong. We'll have that in the mix. It's airing next hour. And our international looks to do a sharp focus on Europe. Melissa Bell in France, Phil Black in London, Scott McLean in Berlin, as well as Italy. MJ Lee about to come up with a pop of breaking news. Harris has now canceled all events through Sunday because her communications director has tested positive for COVID. So obviously that campaign now feeling the effects of coronavirus. The dueling town halls tonight, big focus on North Carolina. Ryan Nobles in Greenville this afternoon, where Trump has a 1 p.m. MAGA rally that we'll be watching to see what news is made there. We are getting Diane Gallagher at Mecklenburg, where early voting begins, and we're seeing the same phenomenon there that we've seen in Georgia and Texas. We'll continue to hit Georgia and Texas lines, and Kristen Holmes with the step back and all the voting issues. Allie Phillips and Ron Brownstein on Obama's message to African Americans and Latinos, how he's ready to hit the campaign trail. Leon Panetta on the Obama warnings about foreign policy and conspiracy theories. We do have Ben Ginsberg on with John King on the GOP ballot box issues in California, and Brian Stelter and Carl Bernstein help hit some of those media angles around the Trump town hall tonight and the backlash against NBC. Also, Dana Bash's new Trump voter piece will air at noon today. And finally, Manu Raju and Phil Mattingly with the final day of confirmation hearings for Barrett with the witnesses testifying.
Thank you very much, Washington.
Good morning. At 3 o'clock, we'll pick up, and we've got, we'll go to our local reporters deployed nationwide on coronavirus. Dr. Rochelle Walensky joins us on the new fall surge. Caitlin from the White House, the dueling town halls. Elizabeth Cohen will join us again, look at vaccines. Pamela Brown has her war on voting rap piece. And ProPublica is debuting a new report with us on the inner workings of the CDC. At 4 o'clock, Caitlin's got a package, and we'll get Sanjay, of course. We've got our COVID rap piece. We're going to go to our international reporters with so much popping overseas. Politics, Senator Dick Durbin joins us, and as mentioned, Zeleny has that piece on seniors.
And in the Situation Room today, the second wave of pummeling the country right now will be on focus. 16 states at their all-time peak, what it means for families and Thanksgiving. Fauci's comments blasting herd immunity, the WHO saying healthy adults will likely have to wait till 2022, task force nowhere to be found. We'll cover all of it with our medical voices, Sanjay, Dr. Besser, Dr. Murthy, the Nick Watt COVID rap piece, as well as international whips highlighting the dire situation in Europe right now. These dueling town halls tonight, the Biden Tash Hall, the Obama comments, Senator Harris now canceling all travel until Sunday. We'll break down all that, the political and media angles. We do have Bob Woodward booked again today to talk about all the latest political threads. And we will continue to focus on all the latest voting issues, including the GOP in California refusing to remove their ballot boxes with our Pamela Brown rap piece, as well as reporters on the ground. And that's where we start.
Thank you very much. Other thoughts? Anybody with any thoughts on any aspects? Okay, obviously tonight's prime time will focus very, very heavily on the aftermath of the town halls. So obviously that'll be the big story tonight. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.